Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Way the World Works. It might seem like we're talking about free speech a lot recently, and so if you have free speech fatigue, I apologize. The reason I am doing so many episodes on free speech is that I think it is the issue of our time. I think right now it is of the utmost importance. So as I say a lot, I think there is a reason it's the First Amendment. I think there is something so sacred and so important about it. And so once again, we're going to have another episode on free speech. But this one is I want to talk about why it gets tricky sometimes and why you see a lot of people arguing it, even people who generally agree. And we're seeing that a lot right now. So I want to talk about that and I want to get into a little bit. So my friend said something really interesting the other day, and that is there are kind of two different forms of free speech if you think about it. There's constitutionally protected free speech, and then there's this like cultural idea of free speech. So I want you to bear that in mind, and I'm going to get into that in a minute. So when I say constitutionally protected free speech, I think we all pretty much know that. The government is not allowed to infringe on a person's right to freely express themselves and on a person's right to freely associate. We talked about that a little bit. I don't know in what order it's going to air, but if you haven't seen it already, there's an episode on the Red Scare when people lost their not only freedom of speech, but their freedom to associate with certain groups the government thought were un-American. So freedom of association, freedom of expression, freedom of, and this one's interesting, your freedom to spread information. So this is a side note real quick, because this is a really interesting other part of free speech. So a lot of times cities will try, like there are cities in California that say people can't teach surfing instruction on a beach without getting all these licenses, but we're only going to give licenses to certain businesses. And it's this whole thing, which we talked about occupational licensing before. And that's one of the world's worst ideas, actually, in the Tuttle Twins Guide to the World's Worst Ideas. But I bring this up because that's actually a free speech issue. It is a right to earn a living. But when you're telling a surf instructor they're not allowed to give verbal teaching instruction to somebody, that's also something protected by free speech. Freedom to receive information, so that actually kind of goes in that way. If you're the student wanting to receive that instruction, also freedom of free speech. Freedom of free speech, you get what I'm saying. And also, they try to tell companies, the FDA sometimes, what they're allowed to call, like what products are allowed to be called what. So even though I do not like Beyond Meat or this lab-grown or vegetarian meat, vegetarians do, and that's great. Free market, there's a market for it. But a lot of times, like the meat lobby or the beef lobby will say, well, you can't call it a burger, or you can't call it beef because that's not what it is. And they'll try to use the FBA to abridge the speech they're using on labels. So free speech goes into so many different things. I mean, it's such a complex issue. For the sake of this, we're going to talk about free speech and free expression. And so the First Amendment guarantees that. Now, you are going to hear a phrase, hate speech. You're going to hear this term thrown around a lot lately. And this is not new. People will try to say you don't have a right to hate speech. And let's get into that. So from a constitutional law perspective, there is no such thing as hate speech. There is no legal precedent in the courts for hate speech. There is no such thing as hate speech when it comes to the First Amendment. So why do people want to throw that around? Well, we saw this a lot with the peak of cancel culture a few years ago, where people were trying to get people banned from Twitter or banned from speaking on college universities because they were saying, no, this person promotes hate speech. Now, part of the reason that hate speech doesn't exist from a constitutional standpoint is think about how subjective that is. And subjective means we each have our different views on something because we each have our own unique set of values and wants and needs. So what does hate mean? What means hate to me might not mean hate to you. We have very different concepts of hate speech. And without a set objective meaning of that, legal meaning, and you can't put a legal meaning to something that we all think differently on, I could say, if you told me you hate the color teal, which is my favorite color, if you said, I hate the color teal, I would say, that is hate speech because I love the color teal and you're offending me with that hate speech. And oh my goodness, where is the law to come tell you that you can't say that? Let's ban you from speaking at a college university. Very silly example, but that's what I'm trying to prove, that we have different points of view. Likewise, if you said, well, she loves teal, I want to shut her down from speaking at a university, goes both ways. So hate speech gets really murky because there's no way to determine if something is hate speech or not, because we all have different views of what that means. And that is why it is so important that we let speakers of all thoughts and all, backgrounds and whatever, we let everybody speak, especially on college campuses where students are there to learn and to shape their worldview. And if they're only getting one side of a worldview, they're not going to be able to form educated opinions. And so we let everybody speak, whether or not we think they're hateful or not. And what's great about this is free speech does not shield you from natural consequences, okay? So if you're on a college campus, and what if you are, in our opinion, very hateful and you're spewing very terrible things? Maybe you're saying, I don't like the Tuttle Twins and I don't like free markets and I think people who believe in individual liberty are bad people, which a lot of people hold that view. If you're saying that, you're allowed to say that, and we should actually let you say that, because that also lets us know who not to listen to. And what I mean by that is, if somebody says truly hateful things, I was using that as, again, kind of a sillier example, but really hateful things about specific people, you have the right not to listen to that. You have the right to not go to that event. And you have the right to say, that person's really hateful. I don't want to give them my business, or I don't want to give them the views on the internet. And that's the beautiful thing about free speech, is that it lets us know who to maybe stay away from and who we think is spreading things that make us feel icky inside. So it's great. It doesn't mean that you have to believe these people, but they need a platform to speak. And this is the constitutionally protected free speech. No such thing as hate speech. All right, let's get into the more complicated side of this, which is this idea of cultural free speech. And this is just my opinion, so I want to know what you guys think. This is something, again, I saw a very intelligent friend online talking about. Actually, it was my dear friend Sean Malone, who we did an interview with a little bit ago. So if you want to go back and hear him, he's got a lot of great ideas. I thought this was interesting. So cultural free speech is more of this idea of what is considered free speech in a realm that is not government protected, in a realm that is in the private sector. What do I mean by that? Social media. Social media is a private, or at least should be private. We're going to get into the nuances of that in a minute. But social media, you should be able to say whatever you want, just like in the government realm, if like a college university that receives public funding. So that's why college was a separate example, because if colleges receive federal funding, which they do, then they are bound by the Constitution. Now, social media, let's pretend in a perfect world they have no connection to government. They can abridge your speech, okay? A social media platform can say, we're going to ban you. Here's our terms of use, which is like a contract, and we love contract law. Here's our terms of use. You can't say this, 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 and this. And if you do, you are subject to a ban. They're legally allowed to do that, okay? They're legally allowed to do that. And you can say, I disagree with that, but then don't sign the contract, don't sign up for that social media account. So these are things that are allowed. Now, however, does that make it right? Not necessarily. You can really, really strongly disagree with a private social media company or a private, let's say, network. So like NBC or ABC or CNN. I disagree with CNN a lot, but I respect its idea to be around. So CNN can block speakers that it doesn't agree with. It cannot have guests on their show that it doesn't agree with. Now, socially, culturally, we can look at that and say, I really don't agree with that because I'm not getting the full side of the story. I'm only getting one side. So I want to go and explore other sides. Now, okay. So when I say cultural, I just mean this is an environment where you can abridge free speech, but doesn't mean you should. And I know a lot of us will think probably a little less of you if you do. Where does this get murky? Because if you'll remember in past episodes, I was very much spoke out against social media banning people for their political beliefs. And I talked about how wrong that was from a free speech angle. And you're probably thinking, well, wait a second, Brittany, you haven't changed your opinion on this. Which one is true? Let's get into the nuances of this. Unfortunately, government has grown so big and so powerful that they use their influence and all these different ABC organizations like EPA, FDA, FCC. We're going to get into that in a minute. where people are trying to control everything. There are people, the government is trying to control everything. Now, a lot of us already suspected this, but it was later revealed. And, Mark Zuckerberg even has spoken out about it now. He is the guy behind Facebook, that the government was pressuring these social media groups, these, people who own these platforms. They were pressuring them to ban people who didn't say what they agreed with. So if the Biden administration was doing it, they were like, we didn't like this right-wing or more conservative influence. You should ban them. You should say it's hate speech. You should do all that. Now, let's talk about this. Social media platforms are under no obligation to cave, meaning give in to the government. But the government loves to coerce. They love to try to force people to do things. So let's say that they said something like, well, we're not going to give you this approval if you don't start banning this person or you don't start banning this group of people. And listen, they shouldn't be able to have that power, but they already do, right? There's already government agencies like the FCC for television, we'll get into that in a minute, who control this, who have way too much power. Okay, so when the government coerces private companies like social media companies to ban people over their speech, that is wrong on the government. That is absolutely unconstitutional. They have no business trying to ban people from social media if it is not something, no, they just don't have the right. However, the social media companies should have stood up more. And Zuckerberg has actually kind of talked about that in hindsight, that he wished he would have stood up more. But it's a little bit scary when you have, the FBI or someone telling you, don't give these people platforms, blah, blah, blah. So let's draw that line right now. Social media companies are private. They can set their own terms and conditions, whether that be something you do like or not like. You can sign up or not sign up. The government should not be able to coerce them into abridging free speech. That being said, social media platforms as private companies should be able to stand up to the government, and some of them get scared. And because they feel coerced and scared, that makes the government in the wrong. That is the government trying to abridge free speech. Now, the same thing is true with television networks. Now, I don't watch TV anymore because the world is full of streaming. I watch Netflix and all those things. So if somebody on a news station or a late night show, for example, which is what we're seeing going around now, if somebody says something bad or something somebody else doesn't like or something the network doesn't like, the network can fire them for anything. The network can literally say, a private network like ABC in this example can say, we don't even like, we don't like his beliefs. We don't like the shoes he wore. We're going to fire him. As a private company, they have every right to do that. However, if the FCC, and they control what's on the radio and on television, they can regulate. I say can regulate, but that doesn't mean they should, or that they constitutionally even have the right. A topic for another time. They exist right now, and that's what they do. So they can say, or they can't say, but they do sometimes, like, we think you should put pressure, or like, we're going to put pressure on this network, and we think maybe you should fire that guy because he spoke out against something we like. Maybe you should fire the guy, and oh, look, you are up for renewal. You need our permission to do something. Wouldn't it be a shame if we didn't give you permission because you didn't do the thing we wanted you to do? Bad, right? The government should not be coercing people to do things. But ABC should still have the power to say, no, we're going to go against you because this is our right to free speech. This is our right. And they feel pressured sometimes, though, if the government can give them certain privileges and is going to withhold them. That being said, so right now, a late night host got fired for making comments that were untrue. And I disagreed with them. I'm not a fan. And the FCC allegedly put some pressure on this host to be fired. Now, if that is true, if the FCC put pressure on the network, constitutional violation, that is absolutely not okay. On the other hand, if the news station ABC thought his ratings were bad, which they were, and if he was wasting a lot of the company money, which was also happening, they can fire you for pretty much anything. That's their freedom to associate. That's their right to censor speech. Censorship isn't great, but guess what? Private companies can do that. So it goes both ways. And I bring up these two examples because there was one side of the political aisle that really didn't believe that people should be banned from social media. And there's another side now that's saying people shouldn't be banned from TV for saying their opinions. And the truth of the matter is, private companies can abridge your speech whenever they want. Doesn't mean it's good. Means you could take your money elsewhere and you don't have to sign up for these platforms or for these streaming, programs or for even watching something on TV. But when the government is involved, when the government starts whispering in people's ear and saying, oh, we're not going to give you this special privilege if you do that, that is a problem. That is unconstitutional. And when I say this is when free speech gets tricky, it's because this is when free speech gets tricky. And man, just ask your parents. We're seeing a lot of people arguing about this right now. And I'm sure there are some parents out there who might disagree with what I'm saying. And that's okay too. In fact, I love it. Disagree. Let's talk about it. But if we're bringing this up from a constitutional standpoint, this is a truism. Now, again, it's so tricky. I was going to go and do another big thing, but it's so tricky. And these are the moments, I think it was Patrick Henry that said, these are the moments that try men's souls. And that was about the lead up to the revolution and deciding whether or not to separate from Britain. But let me tell you right now, guys, these are the times that try men's souls. And I mean, men and women, of course, that was just an old phrase they said, but our beliefs are going to be challenged right now in ways that I think we were not prepared for. And I know that I've had to sit and I've had to reflect and I have to say, what really is free speech constitutionally? What is free speech socially? Where do these things come in conflict with each other? And I have had to really challenge my worldviews because I get angry when people I don't agree with say horrible things. I get angry when people maybe spread misinformation. And I don't even like that term because remember, during COVID, anybody that didn't say what the government believed said, oh, misinformation abridged their speech. But at the end of the day, I think we need to remember when it is bad for the government to get involved, when it is bad for a private platform or a network to cave to that, and when it's completely okay, even if we disagree with it. So these are really difficult conversations. Even I have gone back and forth on having to really wrestle with myself on what these mean. So yeah, I thought this was an important episode because again, not only for the parents, but kids hear things. You guys know what's going on. You hear these debates. And so let's talk about them. Let's make sure we're informed so we know. So we will leave it there. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe to the podcast. And until next time, I will talk to you later.